On today's show, we know what a success would look like overall for the Cavs, but what about on an individual basis? There are a few players that I want to talk about specifically. Lonzo Ball, Larry Nance Jr., Jalen Tyson. What does a successful season look like for them? We'll discuss all that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham, and you might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, and a number of other stops along the way. And I just want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure to drop us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get started here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. A proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For the Cleveland Cavaliers this season, a success is getting to the NBA Finals, maybe winning the NBA Finals, but if they don't win the Eastern Conference, it's going to be hard. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that this was a successful season for them. However, I think things are much more complicated on an individual basis for several players on the roster. And I do plan on having this conversation with just about every single player on the Cavs roster, but I think that it is much more tied into winning as you look at the star players. So I find the conversation to be a little bit more fascinating with the role players that the Cavs have. And I wanted to spend today by talking in particular about two guys that are newcomers for the Cavaliers. And I want to begin this conversation with Lonzo Ball, because Ball was, of course, the first guy that the Cavs acquired this offseason in the free agency period, so to speak. He was acquired via trade from the Chicago Bulls. The Cavs sent out Isaac Okoro and received back Lonzo Ball. And I think that Lonzo Ball, and I talked about this a little bit on yesterday's show, but I do think that Lonzo Ball is somebody that can raise the ceiling of the Cavaliers. He can change their identity about as much as a role player can. But individually for him, what exactly does a successful season look like? And for Lonzo Ball, I believe it starts with health. And I don't think that it can start anywhere else, given what his injury history has been over the past several years. We go all the way back to his first season in Chicago, the 2021-2022 season. He played 35 games for the Bulls. It was a very successful 35-game stretch for him. He shot 42% from three. The Bulls were playing great basketball. I believe they were as high as second place in the Eastern Conference at points in that season. They were having an awesome season. And then Lonzo had that knee injury, and that knee injury seemingly became more complicated every week that passed. Originally, it was a knee injury that was reported to be roughly 6 weeks until Lonzo Ball could get back on the floor. And then 6 weeks turned into, well, it's going to be a little bit longer. And then he was ruled out for the rest of the season. And then he was not ready to start the 2022-2023 season. And then he needed another surgery and then another surgery. And ultimately, it would be more than 2 years that Lonzo Ball missed before he was back on the floor. And as you know, if you've listened to the podcast or if you've watched the NBA, Lonzo Ball returned to the floor last year. He played 35 games yet again for the Chicago Bulls, starting 14 of them, and then did miss a significant chunk of the season. However, not most of that because of a knee injury, rather because of a wrist injury. He did not play for the Bulls after the month of February. He played his final game for the Bulls on February 28th, so the month's final day, in an overtime win over the Toronto Raptors. And then he missed the remainder of the regular season because of a wrist injury. Now, the good news about that is that it was a wrist injury that kept Lonzo Ball out. It was not the knee acting up. And I do think that's one of the other things that is worth looking into is the amount Lonzo Ball was playing, because you can go back and look at for the full season, or for the 35 games more accurately that he played, he averaged right around 22 minutes per game. But if you go back to the final 13 games that he played, Lonzo Ball was averaging just under 26 minutes a game for the Chicago Bulls. So he was on a path to getting more playing time, to be ready to take on more playing time. And in fact, in the last game that he played for Chicago, He played 34 minutes. And that gets me to what should this season look like for him? Because Lonzo is going to be a role player. He's not going to be tasked with being the team's starting point guard for the entire season. I think that there are maybe parts of the season where he could be the starter, maybe the beginning of the season. I don't know if that's in the cards. I don't know if that is the direction the Cavs are going to go. I don't think that's the direction I personally would go if I were Cavs head coach Kenny Atkinson, but he could at certain points find himself in a starting role. But more often than not, he's going to be somebody that is tasked with playing somewhere between 22 and 25 minutes per game. Now, the key to success for him, as you know, is to stay healthy, because when you have the injury history that Lonzo Ball has, staying healthy is not a given. When somebody has played 70 games in 4 years, it is very much a conversation that becomes, well, if Lonzo Ball can stay healthy, that is something that, of course, I have to say every time I bring him up because of the injuries that he has dealt with. He's not played a full season of basketball really ever in his career, which is something that's worth noting. Now, part of that is because of the COVID-19 pandemic. He has been in the NBA for 6 years that he's played. 2 of those 6 years have been shortened because of the pandemic. So you look at the 2019-2020 season, he played 63 games on the Pelicans. Of course, the Pelicans didn't play a full 82-game schedule because that season was shortened by the pandemic. Then the year after that, which was, I believe, a 72-game slate, he played 55 games in New Orleans. So he was a little bit more durable in those 2 seasons than those raw numbers would indicate. If you look at the percentage of the season in which he played, very respectable place to be. But the 35 games in 2 of the past 4 seasons, totaling 70, is something to be concerned about. But I do think that with a limited workload, which he's not going to be asked to play the amount of minutes that he was asked to play earlier in his career. So last year in Chicago, he averaged 22 minutes per game in the 35 games that he played. His first year in Chicago, his first set of 35 games, he averaged 35 minutes a night. That's not going to happen in Cleveland. Before that, in New Orleans, it was right around 32 for the 2 seasons that he spent there. In Los Angeles, in the 2 years he spent with the Lakers, he averaged 32 minutes a game. He's not going to be anywhere near there. And I do think that is something that could help to keep him a little bit more durable, to keep him on the floor, limiting that workload. I think that is part of what could make this a successful season. Now, let's talk about some actual numbers, some things that we can quantify, because staying healthy is quantifiable in terms of, well, how many games does he play? But I also think it's a little subjective, because it's going to be about, well, how effective was he when he was on the floor? And the number that I'm going to look at as it pertains to Lonzo Ball is, how well does he shoot from beyond the arc? Last year, he shot 34%. Now, he was dealing with a wrist injury at times. He had missed 2.5 seasons before last year. So I do think that it was fair to expect him to be a little bit off of his career norms from beyond the arc last season. He is, for his career, a 36% three-point shooter, but I do think that you have to look at his career in a couple of different lights, because if you look at the start of his career, he was not a good shooter when he was a young player with the Los Angeles Lakers. He shot 30% from three-point range as a rookie. He shot 33% from three-point range, a second-year player. Not good numbers, especially considering his value. He was taking more than 5 a game in those 2 years. He got to New Orleans and he became a very, very respectable three-point shooter. He shot a combined, in the 2 years he was in New Orleans, he shot 37.6% from beyond the arc. If he shoots 37.6% this year for the Cavs, I think Cleveland will be very happy with that. And I think he will be very, very effective. That would, of course, be up from what he was last year. I do think it's worth looking at what he did before he was injured in Chicago. In the 35 games, and this is a small sample size. 35 games is not a large sample size, and the fact that it came at the start of the year before an injury, and we don't know if that same player is still there with Lonzo. But he shot 42% from 3. Now, that could be a hot stretch. It could be something real. That Bulls team at that time was better than any Lakers team or Pelicans team that he had played for. And he has been somebody that, while he has been on teams that have gone to the playoffs, he's never played in the playoffs. So he is going to be in a different situation particularly, I think, on the offensive end of the floor, than what he's ever been in his career. So I wouldn't expect him to go out there and shoot 42, 43% from beyond the arc. But I also look at what he did last year. And I think he's not going to be coming in and trying to knock 2.5 year rust off. He played a basketball game in the NBA in the month of February last year. And from everything that I've heard, have the Chicago Bulls gotten out of the play-in and advanced as the number 8 seed to take on the Cleveland Cavaliers in the first round, Lonzo Ball would have been able to play at some point in that series. I don't know if he would have been able to play in game 1, but I've heard he would have been able to play at some point in that series. So Lonzo, my understanding is that he's fully healthy going into the season. And I would expect him to be a better shooter given the supporting cast around him in Cleveland and the fact that he's not nursing an injury at this point. So I would expect him to be a better shooter than he was last year as a member of the Chicago Bulls. I don't know that he's going to be above 40%, but I'd be very surprised if he's below 35% from beyond the arc this year. I think that is one of the key indicators that's really going to tell us just how successful this season is for Lonzo Ball. And yes, he's going to be judged like everybody on this roster on how successful the Cavs are in the postseason. But Lonzo also has a team option for next year. And if he has the type of season that I believe he can have, that I expect him to have, that should be an easy decision for the Cavs to pick up and to bring him back for a second year. And I think that if that decision is made, we'll know pretty clearly how the organization felt about him in terms of a successful season. And depending on what time you are listening to this, if you are one of the people that listens to this very early in the morning, then this is not out yet. But if you're listening to this a little bit later in the day, I did write a big story over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, that came out today, or is, again, coming out in a couple of hours, depending on what time you're listening to this. But it'll be out about 9 o'clock in the morning on Wednesday morning, about the way Lonzo Ball raises the ceiling for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I would encourage you to go check that out. I have talked profusely about how I think he increases the lineup flexibility that the Cavs will have because he's on the roster, and he will impact players on this team in ways that I don't think anybody else can impact them. So I dug a little bit deeper into that. And a lot of the stuff that I was able to find about how the Cavs played last year, about how Lonzo Ball has performed in the past, really does back up what I've been saying all summer. So I would encourage you, go check that out. A link to my Substack is in the show description below me right now on YouTube if you want to go check that out. But I dug deep into those numbers, and I think it's a very interesting thing. And I think that is another way to judge just how Lonzo Ball should be looked at, whether or not it's a successful year for him. Now, Larry Nance Jr. has already played for the Cavs, played for a bunch of franchises in between, and he's back in Cleveland. What does a good year for him look like, his second stint in Cleveland? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Did you know that most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, right? Could you imagine not knowing what you're worth? Well, some of you out there are probably thinking, hey, that's me. I have no idea what I'm worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, investments. If you don't have that full picture, it's really, really difficult to make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money, because with Monarch Money, they will be an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings that entire financial picture together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. You don't want to be leaving money on the table, and this is one way to make sure that you don't. Monarch is also built for people with busy lives, like I think I qualify there pretty well. If you've put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you because they do the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Right now, use code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDON NBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. Again, that's 50% off your first year. Just go to monarchmoney.com and use code LOCKEDONNBA, that is LOCKEDON NBA, to take control of your finances. Again, don't let this financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Head on over to monarchmoney.com today. Thank you again for making Locked on Cavs your first listen today and every day. And like I said earlier, if you are listening to the show via whatever podcast app is your preferred one, make sure you hit subscribe. That is one of the best ways you can help grow this show. Larry Nance Jr. was the free agent signing of the summer for the Cleveland Cavaliers. I say that because they weren't really players in the free agent market. As a team operating in the second apron, they couldn't really be players in the second or in the free agent market, but Larry Nance Jr. agreed to a veteran minimum contract with the Cavaliers, and he returns back for a second stint in Cleveland. And I think that this one, health, just like Lonzo Ball, although not as notorious as Lonzo Ball, health is a big thing for Larry Nance because he did only play 24 games last year with the Atlanta Hawks. Now, to be fair here, not all of those games were because of injuries. Some of those games he was inactive because of an injury. Some of those games he just did not play. Some of those games he just took a DNP CD. He was not necessarily always part of Atlanta's plans. I can't speak to what the Hawks were thinking last year. I think Larry is still a very useful player, and I think that we will see that this year with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the thing that is most different about Larry Nance Jr. now than when he was with Cleveland the first time is his ability to shoot from beyond the arc. Now, we do, I think, need to see this a little bit more. I think we need just a little bit more proof of concept from Larry Nance as a three-point shooter. But last year, in the 24 games that he played with the Atlanta Hawks, he shot just under 45%, 44.7% from beyond the arc in 3.2 attempts per game. That was by far the most attempts per game that he has taken in a single season. Yes, small sample size, but he has felt confident in speaking with him when he had his media availability after he signed back in July. He feels confident that that is the place where he's grown the most since he left Cleveland. Let's flash back to the last time he was in Cleveland in the 2020-2021 season. The 35 games he played with the Cavs, Larry Nance Jr. took 3.3 attempts from beyond the arc per game, shooting 36%, which very respectable. And in the pandemic shortened 2019-2020 season, the 56 games that he played, he shot 35% on 2.8 attempts per game. That was really his first year taking a significant amount of three-pointers. Every year before that, he was taking fewer than 2 a game. So in his career, he's only had 3 seasons in which he has taken at least 2 3-point attempts per game. I would expect this year, if I could make a bold prediction that is specific to Larry Nance Jr., I would expect that this year, Larry Nance Jr. is going to set a career high for 3-point attempts per game. That current high is 3.2 in 24 games. Last year, he played 19.3 minutes per game. His minutes might be maybe a little bit lower. I would imagine they're going to be somewhere between 15 and 18. But I also think in those 18 minutes, Larry Nance is going to shoot 4 threes a game. And is he going to shoot 44.7% the same way that he did last year? Probably not. But I don't think it's nothing that in the past 2 seasons, he has shot 41.5%, and that was on low volume. That was on 1.1 3-point attempts per game as a member of the Pelicans. That's not what the Pelicans were looking for him to do. And then last year, shooting, as I said, just under 45% a game on 3.2 attempts, which is nothing to gloss over. Like, it's not crazy impressive because of that volume. And I do think if he can do that at just a little bit higher of a volume, like can he take, instead of 3.2, 4.2, can he add 1 3-pointer per game to that and still shoot above 40%? Well, if he can, he's going to be one of the best backup big men in the league. If he can do that, if he can stay healthy, he's going to be very helpful for the Cavs. And I think a big part of his helpfulness too is Larry has the ability to play both the 4 and the 5. And since the Cavs drafted Evan Mobley, you go back to that first year and they had Jared Allen and they had Evan Mobley and they had Lauri Markkanen. And Lauri played a lot of small forward. He could play some 4 alongside Jared Allen. But he, one, wasn't somebody you were really going to play at center. And 2, Evan Mobley is just in such a much different part in his career. I don't know how much it's worth looking back at that. And then we know Lauri is part of the trade for Donovan Mitchell, which was a great trade for the Cavs that they should do over 10 out of 10 times. and they would. But since then, the Cavs have not had a big guy that they can play really both alongside Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. Tristan Thompson has, for the most part, been that backup big that could play center, but he really couldn't play power forward, right? Like you couldn't see Tristan Thompson on the floor with Jared Allen if you were something went wrong. Now, I can see Larry Nance Jr. playing alongside Jared Allen and alongside Evan Mobley. I think it's really important for the Cavs that they have that additional lineup flexibility. And I think the shooting is a big part of it, because if Larry Nance Jr. is not a very successful three-point shooter this year, then I think it becomes a little bit difficult for the Cavs to play him alongside Jared Allen, because if that space is not there, Larry doesn't have the same athletic juice that he had in his first run in Cleveland. Like he came to Cleveland as this super bouncy athlete that could, basically touch the rafters inside Rocket Arena. He's not that guy anymore. He's not unathletic by any stretch now, but he's not the same bouncy athlete he was at 25 years old. Just like most of us are not the same bouncy athlete we were 5 years ago. I know I certainly am not. But he is still a little bit athletic, but he doesn't have the same offensive juice. He's not going to be somebody that's going to be beating guys off the dribble. Although I do think his playmaking is a little bit underrated. I look at what he can do as a quick decision maker. That will be helpful. But if he can shoot a respectable three-pointer, he's going to be able to play alongside Jared Allen or Evan Mobley. The fit alongside Mobley is going to be awesome for Evan if Larry Nance Jr. can shoot the ball that well from beyond the arc, because teams are going to have to create space while the Cavs are still going to be able to play big. Also, it'll work alongside Jared Allen because they won't be able to, they'll have to respect Larry Nance Jr., making it so that the perimeter players will still have plenty of room, despite the fact that the Cavs would be playing with two bigs out there. So I think that Larry Nance Jr. providing a legitimate option, a good backup option, a top end backup third center, if you will, third big man really is what he is. That is a huge boost for the Cavs. And I think that all of this goes back to whether or not he can be a successful shooter from outside. If Larry Nance Jr. shoots 38% from three on 4 threes a game, which is admittedly significantly down from what he was last year. But if he can just do that, things are going to be really, really good for the Cavs when he's on the floor. Now, there's a role player that was on the roster last year that I think is going to have a much bigger opportunity this year. We're going to talk about Jaylen Tyson. Yeah, Jaylen Tyson, last year's first round pick. We're going to talk about him next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade because 5-Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins, very, very important, and nutrients with 0 sugar and, more importantly, 0 crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Having that tiny 2-ounce 5-Hour Energy shot that just, fit right in your pocket. It's not big. You don't have to lug it around. You don't have to worry about, man, how am I going to have enough room to carry around this huge, bulky 5-Hour Energy? No, it's not like that. It's great. You've got the big taste in a tiny shot. You can take it anywhere, gives you the boost when you need it. And the fact that there's no crash is such a big deal. I mean, one of the things that I cannot stand about caffeine is it'll give you that boost. No doubt about that. But then 3 hours later, you feel worse than before. And nobody wants that. With 5-Hour Energy, you don't have that. So enough with your boring, flavorless caffeine. Now is the time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5-Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love, or maybe let's take a little tiny step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. Available in-store and online at 5hourenergy.com. That is the number 5, HOUR, energy.com, or on Amazon today. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first watch today and every day. You can help grow the show on YouTube, because if you are watching, do me a favor. Before I go any further, hit that thumbs up button and make sure you are subscribed to the Locked On Cavs YouTube channel. Jaylen Tyson was the number 20 overall draft pick in the 2024 NBA draft. And last year, I don't want to say was his season to forget for Jaylen, because I do believe that being in that situation where he was able to be around winning at such a high level is a really, really good thing for any rookie. But I also don't think that on draft night, he would have expected that he only played in 47 games and averaged fewer than 10 minutes per game. I don't think that was the expectation for him going into the season. And truthfully, I'm not sure that was the expectation for the Cavs going into the season. I do think that they believe Jaylen Tyson was going to be able to provide them or maybe jump into the rotation at a certain point. However, the Cavs won 64 games last year. The Cavs were able to boost themselves up without needing Jaylen Tyson to contribute. That essentially led to what is for all intents and purposes, a redshirt season for Tyson. I don't think that the reason he didn't play last year is because he wasn't good enough as an NBA player. I think most of it's because the Cavs won 64 games, as I mentioned. And where were there holes in that rotation? There really weren't any. But I do think it was important to note that when Tyson did need to step up, he did so relatively well. And I think that this year, a success for Jaylen Tyson is taking advantage of the opportunity that will be there for him in training camp at the start of the regular season, during the preseason, even though I skipped that step. Taking advantage of that opportunity is going to show us a lot about who Jaylen Tyson is as a basketball player. Because with Max Strus sidelined, and we know he's going to miss at least the first couple of months of the season for the Cavs, with him sidelined, there is a role available for Jaylen Tyson. The Cavs, while I do think they have some really nice players on the wing, Max Strus is one of them, DeAndre Hunter is one of them. I don't necessarily consider Sam Merrill to be a wing, but he's a good player. But there is not a crazy amount of depth there. There is a real legitimate opportunity for Jaylen Tyson to maybe not come in and start, because that's not what I would expect. But I do think there's an opportunity for him to play 15 to 20 minutes a night at the start of the season. And the goal for Jaylen Tyson this year, the way to define a success for the second-year player out of Cal, is to force himself into the rotation at the start of the year, to be so good in training camp in the preseason that Kenny Atkinson has no choice but to make sure that Jaylen Tyson is in the rotation and playing every single night. Maybe it's as the ninth man, but making sure that he's playing every single night. And then taking advantage of that opportunity and being somebody that is good enough in that role that when the Cavs are fully healthy, because ideally they will be fully healthy at some point, the Cavs can't exclude Jaylen Tyson. If that is the case, things are going to feel much better, not only about what this postseason could be, because you can never have enough depth in the postseason. As we learned this past spring, where the Cavs ran out of depth, you can't have too much of that. And two, at a certain point, there's going to be a financial crunch for the Cavs. Maybe it's next summer. Maybe it's 2 summers from now. Maybe it's 3 summers from now. I don't know, but there will be one. And if Jaylen Tyson can turn himself into a starting caliber player in the NBA, or maybe a 7th player on a really, really good team in the NBA, I think that alleviates some team building concerns that the Cavs have. I do still think at this point, it's very important that Jaylen Tyson is a successful draft pick after being picked 20th overall. And I think being on the right path to being just that would be a successful season for Jaylen Tyson. That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Cavs. Again, want to say thank you to making Locks On Cavs your first listen today and every single day that you do make this show your first, or maybe even, I guess, sometimes your second listen of the day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Make sure you subscribe there. And you know what? Subscribe on your second favorite podcast app too. And if you're watching the show on YouTube as we get out of here, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. Now, for your second listen of the day, go check out Locked On Guardians. They had a big win over the Tigers last night. I delayed in recording this until that game was over. I was disappointed Cade Smith gave up that home run to Kerry Carpenter in the 9th, but 4 straight extra base hits in the 10th was pretty cool. So go check out those guys. Make that your second listen of the day. And of course, I will be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.